Hello and welcome to this digital broadcast on CGTN Africa. My name is Jerry Owilli and I will be your host as we take a look at the ongoing Africa Cup of Nations tournament in Egypt. Now, the competition has already given us some shocking results so far, but more is yet to come. The group stage finally came to an end on Tuesday with 8 teams dropping out. These include Kenya, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Guinea-Bissau, Burundi, Namibia, Angola, and Mauritania. The round of 16 begins on Friday, and we have quite some interesting games lined up. But who will make it to the July 19 final? That's the biggest question. Now, for more on this discussion, I'm joined live in studio by Arnold Kanyangonda, a sports consultant who's very well conversant with African football affairs. Welcome on set, Mr. Arnold.
Nice to be back here,
Now, just to begin with, we have seen some very, very interesting results in this game. We have seen, Benin drawing against Ghana, which is, no one expected that. We have seen Nigeria going down to first-timers Madagascar. But with all these games that have been played already, who do you think, or rather, which game has impressed you most to this point?
Which game or which team? If you're asking which game, it's the same as the team that played it. I would say Madagascar, going out and beating Nigeria 2-0. People thought, okay, maybe because the president of African football is from Madagascar now, that maybe there's a bit of favoritism. But a lot of people forget that Madagascar was the very first team to qualify. Must have been a fluke. It's the first tournament with 24 teams. And then they played a couple of friendlies, lost one to Kenya. And so you thought, this is not a team that's going to go somewhere. But they've played exceedingly well. They beat Burundi, unsurprisingly. They had that the first game was that big draw with Guinea. And then they wound up beating Nigeria. That is a spectacular result. Any country anywhere in the world that beats Nigeria at a major tournament is doing well. And so for me, that's the most impressive performance. They topped their group in their first ever AFCON. Fantastic stuff.
Now, we'll look at that Madagascar team much later on in this interview. But now let's focus on the North African football teams, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria. These guys have impressed so much. We have seen Egypt topping their group, winning all their games. We have seen Morocco playing very impressive football. But compared to the other regions of the continent, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, do you think this points to, a better football system in North Africa?
They do. I mean, I was looking at a picture a friend of mine sent me from the Nations Cup, and it was of, I think, the Uganda team training. And if you look at the quality of the pitch, and then you think about the fact that this country is in a desert, as are most of the other North African countries. Most of Algeria is in the Sahara. Most of Egypt is in the desert. You look at countries like Libya and Tunisia. It's not exactly how, the tropics that the other African countries are in, for example. But they've put together the kind of systems that you see in Europe. Okay, so they've got the academies, they've got the soccer infrastructure, and they really go out of their way to make sure that the systems that work to develop good soccer teams are there. That's why almost every year without fail, 1 or 2 of the finalists in the African Champions League or the CAF Confederations Cup is from North Africa. This year the Champions League was contested by 2 North African teams, one of them being the defending champions Esperance, who won it last year. That dominance doesn't come from nowhere. You just can't pick up teams haphazardly and then bring them to international competition and hope to do well. They build from the bottom up, so the structures are there. Now, with all those structures, though, the talent level seems to have gone down. Because if you look at Egypt, for example, with the exception of Mo Salah and maybe El Mohammadi, they don't have the same level of talent they had when they had players like Wael Goma, Mohamed Abu Trika, Ahmed Hassan, and the goalkeeper Essam El Hadari. The talent level in Egypt has gone down. They've had a lot of problems too since the revolution, with soccer being played in front of in empty stadia. But all told, yes, in terms of systems, the North Africans are better. In terms of talent, I think the sub-Saharan countries, at least most of them, shade them in terms of talent.
Yes, and it's interesting you're mentioning Egypt quite a lot there. Let's look at, in as much as you're saying the talent has kind of reduced over the years, but then they still have Mohamed Salah, they have Mohamed El Neni, they have El Mohammadi, the defender who's already scored 2 goals in this tournament. And this is like the record number of times they're hosting the tournament, and they are also the record holders of the AFCON title. Do you think this is their year?
It is. I mean, anytime Egypt qualifies for the African Cup of Nations, they're favorites. Despite the difficulty, remember they didn't qualify for 3 straight AFCONs. They didn't go in 2012, 2013, and 2015 after winning 3 straight, which was a bit of a surprise. But as you rightly point out, Egypt is the only team that's got 7 stars on their badge. Okay, the next closest one has got 4. Okay, and so anytime they play, and especially when they're playing at home, they are favorites to win the title. But they've been given some good games. they might have won all their games, but they've been given some really good games. And you get the feeling that should they bump into a team like Senegal, or should they bump into, heck, even Madagascar, should they bump into a banana peel, they might slip a bit. They've not looked the confident Egypt that we've known across the years, where they either breeze past teams or bulldoze past teams, but you tell that they're a team of destiny. This team this year doesn't have that touch of destiny about it.
And we had talked about Madagascar earlier on. These guys are playing AFCON for their very first time ever. And they come into the tournament, their first result, a draw against Guinea. Guinea is not just any other team in Africa's football. They're a big team. Madagascar comes first time in the tournament, they draw against them. And then the last game of the group stages, they beat Nigeria, who are actually coming into this tournament as favorites, and they beat them 2-0. Do you think Madagascar actually has what it takes to go all the way?
That's a difficult question. So to win any tournament, you need three things. You need the skill, first of all, the talent, and the player personnel has to be both physically and mentally and emotionally strong and ready for that. Then you need no small amount of luck, but then you need experience. Now, does Madagascar have the skill? Yes. I remember commenting after they played Kenya that this team is better than Kenya. Kenya might have won on a penalty, but Madagascar is so much better. Then we saw them against Guinea and realized, yes, these are players who've come out to play. They took their chances, and that's one thing they're doing. They punish when teams make mistakes. We saw that with Guinea. We saw that for the first goal against Nigeria. Leon Balogun made a mistake, instant punishment. That's fine. But do they have the experience for which there is absolutely no substitute? Have they ever played in the knockout stages of a major tournament? No. Have they ever faced penalties in a major tournament? No. They have played at COSAFA and sometimes done really well, but at the African level, no. And so my worry for Madagascar wouldn't be whether they have the talent or the ambition or the passion or the personnel to do the work that they need to do, but whether when games are on the line, that the experience of, say, for example, a team like Senegal or a team like Morocco might be too much for them.
Yeah. And this tournament began with 24 teams, and now after the group stages we have 16 teams left. And previous editions of AFCON had this number, 16 teams. But then with this expansion and with what you have seen so far in the group stages, do you think this expansion was something that was warranted for African football?
I was really opposed to the expansion, Jerry. I was really opposed to it. I was opposed to the two changes they made, the expansion and the movie tournament date. Now, have I been convinced about the expansion? To some degree? We've seen some not so interesting games, but on the most part, the quality of the games has been high. And it tells you a lot that the most spectacular game that I watched the whole tournament was Kenya versus Tanzania. Never mind the fact that Kenya hadn't qualified for 15 years and Tanzania for almost 40 years, for 39 years, okay? So it shows, and it gives some of the smaller teams the chance to feel a part of the footballing family. So in terms of the change of the teams, I don't think it has done as much damage as I thought it would. In many ways, I think it was better. But now if you look at the teams that are going home, there are no surprises, except perhaps you could argue Angola should not be going home, but the Angola teams of these days are not the ones they used to be, all right? But other than that, Namibia, they participate in AFCON once every 10 years, so 98, 2008, and now 11 years later. If you look at Tanzania, Mauritania, these are not regular participants. So yes, is it good to give them a chance at the table? Yes. But have they improved the quality of the tournament? I would dare say, with the exception of Madagascar, which, as we've clearly seen, belong even with 16 teams, they wouldn't. So there's been no surprise. But I do feel particularly sorry for Zimbabwe. I've been saying this for many years. Zimbabwe is the unluckiest national team in international football. And anybody who doesn't believe that just needs to look at the results Zimbabwe had in this tournament to realize that they are terribly, terribly unlucky. But other than that, the teams that are going home are the teams that did deserve to go home. I don't think teams should be qualifying for the out of the group stage with 3 points.
So are you convinced that these 8 teams, that's Guinea-Bissau, Kenya, Tanzania, Namibia, Mauritania, Angola, Burundi, and Zimbabwe, who you're saying are very unlucky, do you think they would have qualified for the previous editions if, the tournament was still at 16 teams?
Kenya definitely not, unfortunately to say, because remember, Kenya qualified partly because Sierra Leone was kicked out and Sierra Leone had already beat them. Zimbabwe, yes, because Zimbabwe qualified for the last AFCON and Zimbabwe has been qualifying for tournaments. Angola, yes. But Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, CECAFA had 4 teams at this tournament. 16% of AFCON was CECAFA. That should tell you all you need to know, that the expansion has allowed teams that otherwise not qualified to qualify. Has it improved the quality of the competition? Not sure. It's made it more exciting. I'd give it that. But most importantly, has it degraded the quality of the competition? I don't think so. I don't think it's been harmed by having 24 teams. Now, my only concern is, will other African countries be able to host 24 teams? Probably not, but then that's where co-hosting comes in. But all told, I think it's been a welcome improvement. Not so much the idea of changing the play from January to this time. I mean, yesterday at some point, I found myself watching the Women's World Cup semi-final because my interest in the tournament as a Kenyan had been lost once. You know, I knew that Kenya was not going out, so that they might need to rethink.
But if the dates had not been changed, don't you think it was like affecting our African players negatively, especially when the European leagues were still continuing in January and February, and then some clubs would be like, we're not willing to give our player out to go to the national team, or probably they go to the national team, play AFCON, and then go back to their clubs with injuries. And it used to be, you know, it used to cause a lot of clashes between the clubs and the countries. Do you think?
International football is and remains the highest level of football. Okay, that's just what it is. All right, AFCON has always been played at that time. Remember, it's not the only tournament played at a different time. The Asian Cup, if it's being held in a country like the UAE, is normally played in January. If it's being held in Australia, same thing, like we've seen the last couple of Asian Cups. The World Cup has been moved for weather considerations. Okay, so teams will take a break. So why not AFCON? For me, the reason I was really opposed to that is because it looked like it's kowtowing to European interests. How about those countries whose players are not necessarily playing in Europe? And how about all those coaches? For example, Jose Mourinho famously wanted his players to play at AFCON. Okay, if Africa is to be truly free, as we say, if Africa is to truly define itself and to define its own way of doing things, they should stick to a way that makes sense. Now, the weather has been one of the things that has been discussed. And yes, while in countries like Kenya, it would be perfectly possible to play now, and including the other countries that have winter this time, like South Africa or Zimbabwe, we've seen players drenched in sweat in Egypt, like as if somebody turned on faucets on top of their heads, okay? And in the rest of Africa, in Equatorial Africa right now, the torrential rains will make it impossible. It's worked now, but they're saying 2021 is in Cameroon. I'll be very curious to see how it operates in the tropics of Africa, in the rainforest, when it's raining pretty much every day. I don't know if you've been to Central Africa, but there are parts of it where it rains for a week non-stop. It rains for a week non-stop. So on weather alone, that change was ill-advised. But also on, if you want to call it patriotism or African pride, we really shouldn't have changed when we play our marquee tournament based on the whims of European club football. The same way CAF has changed the football calendar to suit Europe. It does, those kind of changes don't make sense to me. Remember, and this is something I tell people all the time, the season in Brazil goes from February to November, just like it used to happen in Kenya, okay? The country with the most World Cup wins takes a break to go play the World Cup. That should tell you all you need to know.
Well, thank you very much for that. Now, let's just focus on something else. AFCON is the biggest football competition in Africa. But then with the games that have been played so far, we still see empty stadiums. We see very big teams playing, but then fans do not turn up to watch these teams playing. How do you think we can remedy this situation going forward?
This is a problem. And it's a problem because, look, they're not training matches. These are official matches, okay? So you want fans to come and enjoy, especially local fans. Now, as we both know, travel in Africa is both difficult and expensive. Sometimes to go to Egypt, you have to go through Europe to get there, okay? But putting all that aside, the cost of the tickets in Egypt, I've been told by my Egyptian friends who are on the ground, are prohibitively expensive, an average of about $12 per ticket. Now, you might pay that to go watch one or two teams, but not every Egyptian is going to pay $12 to watch every game. I do not know why CAF doesn't make attendance at these games free or minimal cost, minimal ticket prices. Anywhere in the world, if you charge people $12 to watch a game, they might watch one or two. But nobody's going to go watch Guinea-Bissau against, say, Angola if they've got no interest in the game, they've got other things to do with their time, and the tickets are expensive. I'm a big advocate in tournaments like this because CAF has already made its money. And it's not the World Cup. And especially the timing when it is right now, people aren't exactly traveling from Europe to watch this tournament. They've got other things to watch. Make the tournament, the ticket entry free. If you have a fun idea, if you've got an ID, make it free. Now, there are some concerns about security in Egypt, but as Egyptian security forces know what to do. There is no reason why, even if the stadium isn't full, the people who show up to the stadium and line up and provide a fan ID can't be allowed in for free. There's been too much bureaucracy around that, and the result, unfortunately, as we are seeing, is empty seats. Now remember, those seats are perishable. And you can't make money from an empty seat. You know, and once that seat is not sold, once the game is done, it's done. I would rather have fans sitting in for maybe even $1, and you get however much you'll get, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, than to have the seats empty and fans be deprived of football. It's not a good look for African soccer.
Sure, and the round of 16 begins on Friday, and we have some very, very interesting clashes lined up ahead. So I'm just going to read these matches as they come, and you tell me who you think will win, who you think will progress to the quarterfinals. The first game on Friday will be Uganda versus Senegal, two very interesting teams. Who are you going with?
That one's an interesting one, you know, because Uganda has impressed, you know. Senegal shouldn't think it's going to be as easy as the Kenya game or the Tanzania games were. That game might go into extra time and even penalties.
So who will take it at the end?
My heart says Uganda, but my head says Senegal, so there you go.
All right, what about Morocco versus Benin? Morocco, definitely.
Benin lucked through with 3 draws.
Remember, they drew against Ghana, so they have something in them.
Their journey is done.
All right, Egypt versus South Africa?
Egypt, hands down. South Africa lucky to be in the second round. Egypt will beat them hands down.
And the big one, Nigeria versus Cameroon.
This Nigeria team just isn't in it. Not that the Cameroonians are much better, but I see Cameroon edging this one. Though it's another one that might go into extra time and penalties, but Cameroon are edging this one. They're too strong, too fast, and I think too talented for the current Nigerian crop.
And the impressive Madagascar versus the DR Congo.
DR Congo are lucky to be there. They've been terrible. You know, they just met an easy team in their last group match and won. Madagascar is beating them.
What about, again now, Algeria versus Guinea?
Excuse me.
Algeria versus
Guinea. That's going to be another tough one. But Guinea haven't been that impressive. I'll give this one to Algeria. They've been growing in strength as the tournament has gone along.
What about Mali versus Ivory Coast?
Another sumptuous clash. Ivory Coast haven't been impressive. Mali has looked surprisingly strong, you know, especially for the amount of talent they've lost over the years. I would give this one to Mali.
And now lastly, and very interesting, Ghana versus Tunisia.
I'll give it to Ghana. Tunisia, again, like I mentioned earlier, they've not been as strong as they've been previously. Ghana looks impressive, and the Ayew brothers seem inspired, almost as if they feel like this is their last chance to ever win the AFCON. Jordan Ayew is having a great tournament. I predict him to be the top scorer. He'll get a couple of those goals against Tunisia.
And of the teams that you have picked, Senegal, Morocco, Egypt, Cameroon, Madagascar, Algeria, Mali, and Ghana, who do you think has the potential to make it to the final game on July the 19th?
I foresee, and I think the bracket works out that way, I foresee a Senegal-Egypt final.
Senegal-Egypt?
Yes.
And in that case, who's lifting the trophy?
You know what? I'm going to go off on a limb here. I'll give it to Senegal to win their first ever African Cup of Nations. It's been too long. They've been too unlucky. It's about time Senegal won something.
That would make Sadio Mane very happy. You remember just last week he was saying he would very willingly give up his Champions League trophy for an AFCON trophy.
As would most people. Again, as I stressed, international football is the highest level of the game. You want to win something with your country, because with a club you can move money here and there and win the title, but with your country you only get the one chance, and you play with the teammates that happen to be citizens of your country. So it's a big achievement winning an international major trophy like AFCON or the Confederations Cup or the World Cup than it is winning a Champions League. So I'm with him absolutely on that, and I do hope that they go all the way through.
Yeah, and just as we wrap up now, you mentioned earlier on about not being sure of, other countries being able to host a 24-team Africa Cup of Nations. Egypt have done it, and they've been impressive because, they had the systems in place, they had the stadiums ready, and, just waiting for the players to come and take part. But now, let's say Cameroon, which was snatched the rights to host the 2019 tournament. Now they were told to wait for the next tournament. Do you think they will be able to host a 24-team tournament?
It was very difficult enough hosting a 16-team tournament, because that meant you needed 4 stadia in 4 different cities. And a lot of those have become white elephants. We've seen that in Gabon, we've seen that in Equatorial Guinea. I honestly don't think African countries should be spending that much money on things like stadia and hospitals and other things are more necessary. I think if they are to keep this format, co-hosting or hosting among multiple countries is the way to go. I came up with this idea, for example, have it be among regions. So for example, if you decide to give it to CECAFA, have the 6 groups be based in 6 different CECAFA capitals. So let's say Addis Ababa, Khartoum, Kampala, Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, and Kigali. Okay. Then after the group stages are done, have the knockout stages played in one of those places, and then the countries, as it gets closer, comes to the center. And if the center or the hosting is Nairobi, then so be it. That way, each of those countries get to see games. But at the same time, nobody gets an extra burden because every country has at least one stadium that is CAF ready. All right. And so instead of putting the burden on the teams, let's use the existing facilities. You know, you've got to cut your coat according to your cloth. And in Africa, not all the countries have got the resources to do that. If it goes to Algeria, perhaps, Tunisia, perhaps, but for most of the rest of the countries, they would need to work together to host together. And CAF is always flexible and helpful about who hosts and when. And so I think that's something they should really look at, and it would be the best way to go forward.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arnold, for joining us.
It's been a pleasure to be here as always.
That has been Mr. Arnold Kanyangonda, who is very well conversant with African football affairs, joining us here in studio just as we look at the Africa Cup of Nations tournament, which is going on in Egypt. Now remember, CGTN Africa will continue giving you all the previews, the reviews, and the analysis until the final game of the AFCON 2019 tournament. We hope you enjoy the rest of the tournament, and we look forward to hosting you again for future digital broadcasts as well. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much. I find it interesting that you think Senegal will actually win.
They should. It's long overdue.